Hello, everyone. I'm Laurel Ruma, the Gov2O evangelist for O'Reilly Media and co-chair for our upcoming Gov2O Expo, which will be in Washington, D.C. at the end of May. And if you like today's webcast, I would like to encourage you to join us at the Gov2O Expo. Jeff will be presenting a session about cyber security with a colleague from the Secret Service. We'll also have a number of other really great cybersecurity panels. And for today, I do appreciate you joining us for the first installation of our series of cybersecurity and government webcasts. Today is Jeff Carr will be leading off. He is the CEO of GrayLogic.us. He's also the founder and principal investigator of Project Grey Goose, and the author of Inside Cyber Warfare, Mapping the Cyber Underworld. The format of today's webcast will be a 30-minute presentation by Jeffrey and then a 30-minute question and answer session. When you do have questions, again, please just type them into the webcast, the field, and the chat field, and we'll aggregate those questions, and I'll ask them to Jeffrey at the end of his presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jeffrey Carr. Jeff?
For those of you that are calling in, you can hear me. I'm going to go ahead and start over with the focus of this presentation is not going to be on the technical side because there's ample information on that level of protection. But the focus of GrayLogic and the work that I do focuses on the actor side. We feel like that's the best way to approach preparing for a cyber attack is understanding who the actors are and how you might be targeted. However, I think it's very useful to look at the entire cyber landscape so that you understand the impact that such a potential attack may have. And this graphic is one way of depicting the multiple layers that are involved, ranging from the simple communication lines and other ICT or information and communication technologies, through critical infrastructures, through just the daily integration of activities that we all do almost without thinking. All of these things are interconnected via the web and therefore are all vulnerable to a potential attack and must figure into how we prepare for those eventualities. This particular list under threat vectors is an important one because I think people have, for many years, people even inside government and inside agencies responsible for cybersecurity have siloed off these different approaches. So financial crime was the province of one agency, whereas espionage was the province of another, while attacks against critical infrastructure might be designated under the department associated with that, Department of Energy or the FAA or NASA. And this various categorization and different assignments of responsibility are not helpful in understanding and defending against cyber threats. And so the trend today that I'm seeing is more cooperation between agencies, which I think is what's needed. But also, when you're in a discussion about cyber, I think it's important to use the term cyber warfare or cyber war judiciously and with some measure of responsibility for defining it correctly. And that's what I'm hoping to do here. So in our work, we categorize these various threat vectors and believe each should be approached differently. So there's clearly computer network attacks. We see that happening every day. But there's also cyber espionage. Cyber espionage should not be confused with an act of war because it's never been that way historically. We all engage in it. And it should be, and it is an important thing to understand and defend against. Cyber terrorism is more of a potential threat than a real threat. And my view on cyber terrorism is that we wait for a few more years when the generation that was born from 1994 forward, it begins to age and take over for the baby boomers that are running things in these various non-state terrorist groups. I think that's one reason why we don't really see massive cyber-related terrorist attacks on a large scale, because the generation of leadership simply doesn't grasp how that might work or how effective it might be. But wait until the people who have grown up on the Internet, who know nothing but the Internet and how to use it and how to exploit it, when they reach a leadership position inside of one of these many groups, that's when I believe we'll begin to see more of a serious terrorist attack via cyber. Cybercrime, of course, is ongoing. Unfortunately, we don't hear enough about it. I wish that companies that were victims of cybercrime would come forward more frequently, because it would help everyone engaged in trying to defend against it and put a stop to it. Network infiltration of critical infrastructure. Well, let me back up for a minute with cybercrime. The importance of cybercrime in relation to cyber warfare or cyber attacks or cyber espionage is that the platform that criminals use is often serves a double purpose. So in the case of the Russia-Georgia war, and of course since then, in any various types of information operations done by the Russian Federation against various parties, the server platforms, the ISPs that host these various domains around the world, are monetized through crime, but they're utilized by non-state actors for geopolitical gain as well. And that's why an understanding of cyber crime and the activities of the cyber underworld are very important for us to understand when it comes to defeating or defending against geopolitical types of cyber attacks. Network infiltration and critical infrastructure. This is probably most significant when it comes to discussing China. So there's no question, if you read any of the military writings of Chinese officers, and there's right now, thankfully, there's quite a bit available online for that produce that level of content. It's very clear that, strategically speaking, should they experience an imminent attack from the United States, that they would launch a preemptive strike to shut down command and control centers via an electronic attack. And in order to do that, they need to already be inside of a network or inside of a grid. Now, that means it has to be done early. And so when you hear about Chinese infiltration of the power grid, for example, it's not because out of the blue they want to turn off power for Southern California. It's because it's in their opinion, a military necessity to have that capability should they see that an attack is imminent from a superior adversary, meaning the U.S. This is an important approach to defend against, but it is not. I don't view it as important as some of the other threats that we're seeing today. The other important thing about critical infrastructure and the Department of Defense is that, according to the last report that I read, which I think was in 2009, 31 out of the 34 most critical assets owned by the Department of Defense are reliant on the public power grid. This again underscores the value, the strategic value of having access or having a presence inside the network, the process control servers, and various interconnects that make up the U.S. power grid in advance of a potential war or an imminent war. The repression of internal opposition groups, this is probably one of the most common uses of cyber attacks that we see today. So if you are a journalist, or if you are an advocate of a dissident group in a country that is known to use information warfare tactics, then you are certainly at risk for this. And frankly, in other parts of the world, this is a very, very serious problem, which often results in injury or death to the person whose voice is being heard over the internet. That is advocating a position contrary to the regime in power. It's instructive to note these acts because you learn if a country is going to use a cyber attack against dissident opponents to the ruling regime, they'll also be using something similar when it comes to attacking other countries or other adversaries. And so that's why it's important to be aware to monitor these sorts of actions. And we see that most frequently with the Russian Federation taking actions against various members of the Commonwealth of Independent States, meaning Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Ingushetia, and so on. And now I end this list with two categories, hybrid warfare and information warfare. So information warfare is the way that cyber warfare is depicted typically in other countries. So in Russia and China, for example, they write about information warfare or informatized warfare. You almost never see the term cyber warfare in their military doctrine or in their operational guidance. But that's what I'm referring to. And so cyber warfare is I define it as strictly a pure network attack. So this would be a way to cause harm strictly through a network. Maybe it's compromising the water supply, shutting down a key component in a process control server that would cause a nuclear power reactor to go red and to release a gas or some other type of nefarious act that would harm the population. It might mean compromising the software that runs an aircraft. These are all sort of pure network-based attacks. Hybrid warfare may be any of those, but it would be done in combination with a physical or a kinetic component. So that might mean, well, a perfect example actually, which ties back into the repression of opposition groups, was in Kyrgyzstan just prior to their most recent revolution, which happened just a few weeks ago. In December of last year, a journalist was targeted via an email attack. So in other words, his computer was hacked into, his email was read. They gathered information on what he was working on, and particularly on his pet projects. They followed that up with a spear phishing attack or carefully constructed spoofed email coming from someone in another country that offered to finance his work or similar to his work, which he accepted. He traveled to that other country and was promptly killed. And this was one of the first steps that the Kyrgyzstan government, in fact, it was the Kyrgyzstan Security Service who arranged that. Right after that, they began systematically shutting down all opposition media until the revolution in April, I think it was April 7th. So that was an example, a microcosmic example of hybrid warfare. So these next few slides are just going to cover some of the actors. I classify actors in three categories. State actors, meaning nation states that are building a cyber capability and or using it, state-sponsored actors, and then non-state actors. So among state actors, here's a list, and this is not a complete list, it's just a list off the top of my head that are either have officially announced that they're building out a cyber capability of some kind and or are using that capability in one of the ways that I depicted earlier. I can promise you that there's more than this. This is a list of, and this title is a little bit misleading. This is actually a list of states that have utilized non-state actors in pursuit of state goal. So that's why I refer to this as state-sponsored actors. However, because this information is actually what I would consider to be critical information or information that we would not want to compromise our awareness of specific groups and their attachments to specific states, I don't have that in this slide. I typically only give that to closed briefings. But these are, conversely, these are the states which we know have utilized and continue to utilize non-state actors for various means. And pretty much non-state actors are everybody else. So that ranges from the script kiddie who's just trying to cause some havoc or mayhem or just see how many different government websites he can deface, all the way up through very professional Eastern European criminal gangs that are operating on the internet. And too numerous to list, as I say here. There's literally thousands of them. So what can you do? Cyber self-defense. This is a quick little course of, I think, practical things that you can do right now to help either stop or minimize the effect of a cyber attack against your organization, department, or agency. The first two things that are very important to understand is that A, you cannot protect all your data, and B, you cannot stop every attack. So, with that in mind, it's important that you identify your data based on criticality. You need to know what your most valuable data is and focus most of your defensive work around protecting or monitoring that data. And second, it still may not work. A dedicated, well-financed, and patient adversary is going to get to your data. It's just a question of how long and how much it's going to cost them and how they go about it. But considering those two things, there is a lot you can do. First of all, you want to reduce your attack surface. Now, here's what I mean by that. Part of this is just basic housekeeping. So make sure that your software is patched. It's amazing how many people just don't even bother patching their software. And don't make it so easy to be attacked. So do proper house cleaning, have your patches in place, have your antivirus signatures updated regularly, and more importantly, don't rely on antivirus signatures because they're not going to stop a lot of the attacks that are going to be designed by a professional group. Make sure that you're using a behavior-based antivirus program in addition to the signature-based antivirus. I'm not able to give you any recommendations on that, but you won't have any problem in finding companies that provide those services. And I highly encourage you to have both. The behavior-based antivirus is an interesting approach because it does not rely on an existing signature. It can defeat a zero-day attack if the zero-day attack uses a characteristic that is recognized as malicious. And that's the way that this type of approach, the heuristic approach, is effective. On the other hand, if it is a unique approach that does not trigger one of those characteristics, it's going to get through as well. Secondly, you need to segregate and protect your critical data. Again, this is something that there's a lot of information out there on how to do this. Clearly, if you're working in classified domain, you already know about this. It's also done by or it's supposed to be done by the public power companies, privately owned power companies as well, to segregate the process control servers, what they refer to as being air-gapped, from the business networks or the front-end networks. So there's no way the two can meet. Of course, there are problems with this, but that's mostly due to budget-saving attempts or vulnerabilities in some of the hardware or software that's acquired by the company to create these gaps. Nevertheless, segregate and protect your critical data is an important step. And finally, you need to watch your data. You need to monitor your most valuable data on a 24/7 basis. You have to establish what access norms are and monitor those for anomalies. In other words, however many of your employees are allowed access to this type of data, how often do they typically access it? You know, is it a few times a week? Is it once in a while? Is it every day? it's important to know what the norms are, because an attack does not always come from outside of your network. Often, a very successful attack will be from a trusted trusted credentials inside your network. And so if John Smith is all of a sudden downloading very large amounts of data, which is abnormal for him, that should raise a red flag immediately. And that would occur if your data was monitored. That also, by the way, very quickly, is a whole other threat vector. That's extremely touchy, and I am not going to dwell on it here, but the insider threat is another very serious matter that needs to be addressed by companies, again, who are dealing with critical or highly valuable data. I'm sorry, one last point. Transparency equals security. And again, this is my opinion. Some may disagree, but I think if we knew the scope of the problem, we'd be able to bring enough resources to bear to address it. As long as we don't know the full scope of the problem, and we don't today, because so many companies do not report breaches, this will remain a lower on the priority list than those things which are being talked about, which are getting more attention in the media and in Washington. Finally, this is a list of R&D priorities for Russia and China. GrayLogic is one of the things that we do in order to help us understand how and why attacks are occurring, or to create an attribution chain. We begin with what the priorities are for any given state, because that's where their money is going to be spent. That's where their espionage activities are going to be directed, and that's the kind of work that is going to be of value to the states, and that will be farmed out to non-state actors. So for your information, I thought it might be helpful if you have an idea of what is right now very high value data and if your company works in these areas, I can assure you you're going to get hit if you haven't already. And so you're looking at, probably not surprising, but nanotechnology, cloud computing, high-end generic chips, large-scale oil, gas, and coal mining. China is really, their priority list really indicates the critical nature of their infrastructure, the very bad shape that their infrastructure is in. The other thing that's very interesting is semiconductors. And that goes to the insider threat problem that I was speaking about earlier, because many of the U.S. companies that do work in semiconductors, including Intel and other high-end technology firms, operate labs in Russia and China. And so the threat is very real for espionage occurring on foreign soil. And that's as much as I had planned to cover today. I did want to add one more thing, and under the housekeeping, see if I can back up to that slide. Oh yes, for cyber self-defense. If you're a C-level executive, or if you're a senior executive and you travel frequently, you really need to have to duplicate your electronics. So when you leave the country, you need to leave your laptop and your PDA and your smartphone in your office safe, and take a clean laptop and a clean smartphone. And when you come back, you need to turn that over to your security department or your IT department, have it checked for malware, and then have it wiped, ready for your next trip. Never take your personal electronics with you outside of the country, because it'll be compromised, no matter what you believe you have, no matter how much protection you believe you have. This is what is done for the President of the United States. If it's good enough for him, it should be good enough for you. So invest in duplicate sets. And let me get back to the final slide. If you have any, I'm going to open this up to questions, but I also want to give you my contact information. One of the things that, one of the threat vectors that we focus on is through social networking. And so it's sometimes valuable for your organization for you to know what your exposure is via your employees' use of social networks. a very good example of how that can be exploited is on today's or yesterday's blog at Forbes, Firewall, and my blog, intelfusion.net, if you care to look that over. But it's important to do an inventory at some point as to how your employers are using social networks, not only your employees, but your employees' families. And thank you. That's it, and I'm happy to address questions.
Thank you, Jeff. If you do have any questions, please just go ahead, write them in on the chat. But one of the first questions is actually from Greg, and he asks, explain the monetization of ISPs and cybercrime. So I'm assuming he's talking about internet service providers.
Well, this is really a hot button topic for me. It's distressing when you see that 20 of the world's 50 worst ISPs are located in the U.S., that so many of the attacks that we track come from U.S. servers. And the reason for this is because it's highly profitable. So the ISPs, and there's a few dozen bad ISPs that are making so much money in providing hosting without questions, hosting without validating registration credentials, that they're simply not taking a proactive role in this. And so it's very simple. It's a profit motive. Sometimes an ISP will cooperate with a request to take down a bad site, and sometimes they won't. But it's not nearly as effective as it should be.
So you mean even some of the larger ones, they household names that we all know, would just be taking money and then also taking money from anybody and not doing their due diligence.
Exactly right.
Does this often kind of get caught up in sort of like free internet, like everyone should be able to do whatever they want, or is there some like logical, like real need to have security kind of follow through with at least validation of who these people are to avoid these awful situations?
Well, yeah, I gave a suggestion in my self-defense to reduce the size of the attack landscape. That also holds true for a country. China is cracking down on ISPs, on bad ISPs. Russia is cracking down on bad ISPs. We are not. We're probably the only major nation that is not cracking down on bad ISPs. And I don't know why that is, honestly. I think it goes back to free expression, free internet. But we're only asking, honestly, the only thing they need to do is verify registration data. That's it. So if they lock down every ISP that has fraudulent data until they can provide them with correct data, that would go a long way in solving this problem. But they won't because of the money. It's just a lot of money, and that's really why they're in business.
So it's a freedom of commerce, of course, as well. So actually, I was really fascinated with your comments about transparency equals security, because it sounds counterintuitive. So most people want to keep things really secretive, and they claim it's part of business. Secrecy to not let their competitors know what they're doing. But even last week we saw that Google started to admit when they were given requests by various governments for information on their networks. Do you think we're going to actually start seeing enterprises and possibly government agencies being more transparent about these types of issues and case studies?
I hope so. I think when I say transparency, what I mean is be transparent in the sense that report the attack. Now, that may or may not involve a public acknowledgement. I think it should involve some type of public acknowledgement, but not all of the details. The details can go to the people that can use them, that are responsible for protecting the country. Those details should be certainly delivered and kept secret, from the general public. But acknowledge the attack publicly so that everyone can begin. It's going to be a bottom-up, I think, revolution if we ever do decide that we want to protect our networks and take the kind of action that we need to take. So the other thing is that as long as it's kept a secret, whoever did that to you is going to repeat it. They'll feel like they got away with it, or they'll feel like it's, they have nothing to lose.
So we have another question came in from John. He wants to know, who would you report an attack to? And I guess the assumption is it depends how bad it is, or are attacks even reported?
Yeah, you should report the attack. Right, and you can report it to U.S. CERT. It depends on the attack. So if it's a bank, obviously you're going to call the FBI. But if it's a company and you've lost data, it's an intelligent or a intellectual property that's been stolen. Then, or if you have somebody open an email which dropped a keylogger and then spread throughout your company, and these are the sorts of things you want to notify U.S. CERT about, or Cisco, or somebody who has access to the root servers that can block these or take down these the IPs that are serving the malware. You probably just want to start with one of the certs. You might want to check with your state. Your state might have an agency set up. Some of the larger ones probably do, but I think many states do not. So
it does seem like there is some sort of clearinghouse, and Jody is mentioning ic3.gov.
Yes, there are some clearinghouses also, and that's fine. But I think you definitely want to get into the hands of some of these major agencies and organizations that can take down the IPs or block those IPs from delivering additional malware.
Yeah, because I feel like just a month or so ago, all these statistics came out about how many attacks government agencies actually are withstanding. And you did mention that there's just different severities of attacks, especially for government agencies. Can you characterize those into 2 or 3 different kind of categories? Because I'm assuming, X% of those attacks are kind of just everyday attacks, people just kind of seeing how far they can get into various systems. But there must be a percentage that are quite serious, that they're keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, so sometimes a lot of these are probably just automated. They're just looking for vulnerabilities in the web architecture, or it's just a drive-by attack. So ones that I'm more concerned with are the targeted attacks. So, for example, somebody had, back in February, there was a spear phishing attack that was targeting, it was using the Zeus Trojan. And this is normally only done for banks. They only use Zeus for banks. It's essentially a keylogger and collects your username and password, your banking credentials, maybe your credit card number, and so on. But this time they used it entirely differently. They used it to gain access to government and military networks. And so when I announced about that attack at my blog, within 36 hours, those individuals recreated a new attack using the same malware, but this time the spoofed email was from me, saying, "Be careful about this spear phishing attack targeting .gov and .mil domains." It was a really ingenious twist on an attack, from their end, very disconcerting, obviously, for me, because my name was now attached to an attack. But they was very effective, and they hit probably over 100 agencies, not only in the U.S., but in Australia and the U.K. and other countries, and some of the agencies involved, the specific agencies involved, were dealing with classified and or national security matters. So this is the spear phishing attack, the targeted spear phishing attack, I see frequently, and I think is very serious. Because once you have trusted credentials, you more or less have free range inside of a network.
So you're saying they would use your name as a security expert to then create spear phishing emails for everyone else within networks, as if the email was coming from you?
Yeah, exactly. So I only knew about this because I was getting out of office replies from people that I didn't know. So all of a sudden, I opened up my email one morning, and here I've got hundreds of out of office replies from government
Wow.
agencies and military websites, military departments. And I didn't send any of these, and it was just simply they happened to have their out of office responder on. But yeah, it was an email from me. It copied word for word my blog post, so it sounded like me, and they signed it, Jeffrey Carr, author of Inside Cyber Warfare. So everything looked good. The only thing that gave it away was the two links that the authors of this spear phishing attack included. A couple of links that theoretically I said you should go to these links and download some kind of patch. And unfortunately, sometimes, you know, when you trust the sender of an email, you don't look at the link. You just click on it. So that's why I trusted, you know, a great breaching of trust, breaching online trust, you know, particularly is easy to do, and it's so dangerous.
Well, David actually has a question. Speaking of trends that are kind of coming up, including spear phishing, what about cyber attacks at the DNS level, cache poisoning, denial of service attacks, etc.?
We do see more and more of that. It's not my area of focus, but I've heard Dan Kaminsky speak on it, and I think it's an incredibly volatile and vulnerable point of attack. I'm not sure strategically, you know, where the leverage would be. I know it can certainly cause chaos. I think that might be part of what I had designated as a hybrid attack. But it would, you know, in and of itself, I can't tell you that I've seen, you know, what the end result of that might be, other than causing chaos in communications.
So you were mentioning how the bad actors, they're already here, right? They're in the grid, they're somewhere. Are they necessarily, and they represent the three different kinds of actors, but if the Department of Defense is using the United States physical power grid, what is an alternative? I mean, would we have to create a separate power grid just for defense activities that you would try to make as secure as possible? Or is this sort of that part of the mitigated risk that you accept and just try to, well, mitigate as you go along, as each attack kind of pops up?
Well, the power grid is an interesting problem, and in fact, you know, Project Grey Goose and Grey Logic wrote a report on attacks against the power grid, against critical infrastructure, and published in January of this year. That's available free online. The reason that the difficulty is that the power grid in the U.S. is privately owned. 90% is privately owned. A lot of these are companies with stockholders, with boards of directors, and security is expensive. So they've been avoiding spending money on cleaning up their networks, on replacing old architecture, on doing the things that really need to be done, because it's going to cost them money. Their profits are going to go down, and legally they could be sued. The board of directors could be sued by shareholders for not maximizing profits. It's a real mess. And if you read the incredibly slow and convoluted process that it takes for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to create security requirements and then have those accepted by NERC, which is the self-regulating organization that speaks for these private energy companies, you just want to bang your head against the wall. It's unbelievably, I can't even think of the appropriate word, but when you weigh that, you know, that sort of intransience against the potential threats of a power grid going down in an area that is of strategic importance at a key time, you know, I just don't get it.
So it's, as always, sometimes the freedom of commerce and freedom of speech actually deters some of these efforts. If you could come in as a very powerful government and just shut down ISPs or make rulings to people to forget about making money for a day and actually improve their infrastructure, those are the things that kind of need to be done to help really deflect the future attacks.
Yeah, and there's some good work that's being done by some individuals. They're trying to measure return on investment. You know, because at least if a corporation needs, you know, to spend money, whether it's on power grid or anywhere else, they need to be able to justify it. So if somebody can do the work on showing the return on investment that a company will receive, if they can avoid loss of data, or if they can, you know, protect themselves against some of these intrusive attacks, you know, that might go a long way in helping them cooperate. I mean, short of some kind of mandate, which is probably going to be incredibly hard to get passed, it's going to have to be a voluntary effort, you know, from the ground up. And again, that goes back to my approach of transparency equals security, because you don't hear about especially regarding the power grid, you don't hear about the attacks that they're, you know, receiving, that they're defending against on a daily basis, or that's causing problems ranging from failure of equipment to an actual outage. You hear almost nothing about any of those by design, but if you did, then I think there would be perhaps more movement to get those privately owned companies to spend the money and upgrade their security in their networks.
So I suppose a lot of it is sort of also like just the general infrastructure of the country, and how you may not realize that you need new bridges until one collapses or is washed out.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a similar parallel of just investing more in the infrastructure to make sure that the future of your company is actually working. Jody actually had a question about the social media aspect, especially with the Department of Defense using, you know, they have new social media guidelines, and troops can now use various social media outlets to communicate home. Can you talk about that a bit more? Is that a very serious threat, or is that sort of, it's something to watch out for, but considering if people are already in our grid, that's a more serious threat, but the social media is something to look out for?
Yeah, we view social media as extremely serious. So not that you shouldn't use it. Clearly you're going to use it, and that's good. And in fact, I personally love social media, but you have to use it with the understanding that you have to, you know, control the information that you provide. And because here's what happens. So if I were the adversary and I were targeting DEA, and in fact, this is actually an emerging threat that we're looking at right now. So you have on the Mexican-Texas border, it was just announced in the news that law enforcement officials in Texas are being targeted for assassination by the Mexican cartels, by one or two cartels. And now these cartels are run, like I said before, they're run by baby boomers, or they're run by less than internet-savvy people. But that's going to change in the next 10 years or less. And imagine what could be done with an internet-savvy member of that cartel using social media to identify and track the key individuals in the Drug Enforcement Administration, in Northern Command, in ICE, you name the agency, and you can find members of that agency on LinkedIn with giving information on LinkedIn that could identify where they are, where they live, what their interests are. You take that information, and you can search for that via Google, or you could create a custom API or a custom application for the Twitter API or for the Facebook API, and exploit that in a broad way. And eventually you build out profiles, attack profiles, for a large group of individuals, and then you focus on the key ones. You can do all of that, and with almost no technology in terms of, you know, having to create a zero-day attack or anything else. You just get enough information about a person to obtain their username and password, and then impersonate them on their own network, and, you know, you're in.
Now, to be fair, of course, before the social networks, you probably could do that, but it would just take days,
right.
A much longer period of time, and probably not be nearly as comprehensive. When you think about someone's social network sphere, You could track down your college professor to your priest to every member of your family probably pretty easily.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not only the employee, but it's the employee's family. Sometimes the employee can be hyper careful, like in the case of the new head of MI5 or MI6. A couple of years ago, it was his wife that exposed his identity as the new head of that agency via just a careless post on Facebook. So often it's a family member who does not have the training, the operations security training that you have, that's just going to do something innocent and wind up creating a problem.
So if you ran a super secret agency, or maybe not even so secret, you would actually have to, or it would be in your best interest, to provide social media awareness training to not just your employees, but their closest family and friends? Almost like a reverse, super secret spy agent where no one knows what you do and you lead a double life. You actually bring people into this secret double life and make sure they don't say anything.
Well, you do have to provide awareness. I think that's the thing. That's the key. You just have to be aware. And I think that, one of the avenues that GrayLogic is looking into is, there's a lot of pen testers out there that will test the vulnerabilities in a network, but almost no one does social network pen testing. In other words, how vulnerable are you based on the use of social media by your employees? And I think that's something that companies should be very interested in.
Do you see social media sites like Facebook, Mark's asking this, maybe even creating opt-out because you are included on people's photos and tags and in their social networks, not of your own will? So if you were someone who's dealing with highly sensitive information, as much as you try to maybe restrain from being on any of the social networks, if someone else includes you, do you think that they'll create a channel for government employees to basically say, hey, please don't let my name on your networks because I am in a sensitive role?
I don't know. That's a good question. Facebook has been moving towards more public disclosure, not less. So the other thing that concerns us is the acquisition by of so many social networks in the U.S. and overseas by Digital Sky Technologies, which is a very profitable Russian internet company. They just bought ICQ. They have a large interest, +5% interest in Facebook. They just bought Groupon. They were just received a 10% investment from QQ, which is China's largest provider of internet services. It's a wonderful open source intelligence gold mine, really. Social networking is, and DST's principles have a long-standing history, successful history with the Russian government. So, as you would expect, from a leading company in Russia, it's almost impossible not to. But yeah, it's just you have to let people know. I think awareness would go a long way. It doesn't have to be draconian. Just a simple awareness, I think, will help.
So that's pretty amazing. When you think of Russian and China ISPs, and I'm assuming that you are specifically calling out these two countries because of history and a long-standing reason to single them out as dangerous actors.
Well, not because it's paranoid. It's because they actually do it. I mean, that's all.
Right.
It's not. I'm not interested in. I try not to waste time on nationalism type thing. It's just simply these are the characteristics. This is what this country has been doing ever since the late 90s in these specific instances, and so that shows a trend. And if you look at the history, you see the trend. It's only common sense to point out the risks in their behavior. And that's the thing. That's what we try to do is keep it grounded in reality.
And I guess with the more location-aware networks like Foursquare, Gowalla, etc., as those are integrated within every aspect of the internet, not just social networks, that's going to be quite a bit of a, once you know where everyone is location-wise, that's another added element, right?
It is, because once you have, going back to my example using Mexican drug cartels, once you've selected the key people in these law enforcement or military agencies or organizations, if you have their cell phone numbers, and oftentimes, if you look far enough or wide enough, you'll find a cell phone number somewhere that's been posted either by them or by a family member or by a friend. Once you have that, then you can track them in real time. So there's already software that's in use in Hacker Underground that will, allow you to do that. And it's growing. It's not yet perfect, but it's definitely under development. And once you know where your target is at any given moment, you can apply pressure. And, that's, I think, the goal here is, speaking as a potential adversary, the goal would be to apply pressure when you need it.
So applying pressure, someone from the forum asks, who would be applying pressure to the ISPs? Is it the FTC or FCC?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's I'm not sure what the law is on that. In my opinion, the best way to get the ISPs to cooperate is to launch some type of initiative, a public initiative, maybe led by Mrs. Obama or someone, of similar stature, to clean up child porn. I think it would be impossible for any ISP not to endorse such an activity. In the process of cleaning up sites that are serving child porn on U.S. ISPs, the easiest way to do that is simply to go through and identify the sites that are not providing fraudulent, or that are providing fraudulent registration information, and then lock them down. Because oftentimes these the criminal gangs that are paying for these services have some type of porn in addition to other types of malware. So it's not a perfect solution, but I think companies can get behind it really quick. It's definitely something that nobody would take a position against, and it would make an impact much faster than trying to pass a law or go through an enforcement, some type of legal enforcement.
Well, we have time for one last question. Jay Baker asks, how do you see your role changing as this open government and Gov2O initiatives expose government data, make government in general more transparent? Is more data always better, or will that actually increase cyber risks?
Yeah, I think I'm happy with open government. My view is you want to protect your most critical data. That's of course not going to be made open. But don't worry about the other. You can't protect it all anyway. So just focus on what's most valuable. And other than that, I think transparency is good. One possible approach to protecting your own data is just to not only have a lot of it out there, but to create expand your data, create other personas, create all kinds. You got two choices. You can either flood the internet with conflicting information about yourself, so that somebody who's looking for you wouldn't know what was real and what wasn't, or take yourself off of it. And I think either approach might help improve your chances of defending or becoming a victim, of an attack.
Well, today's just been amazing, Jeff. Thank you. I'm sure we could go on for hours and hours. There's so many intricacies, obviously, of every single issue that you've touched, and I really appreciate you coming on for the webcast. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thanks. It was my pleasure. I hope people come to the session that we do. I'm looking forward to doing it with a colleague from the Secret Service also. I'm hoping that we'll have one more representative from the FBI as well, and so we'll try to engage in real serious issues that are happening right now, and what we can do about them.
Excellent. And then Jeff's talking about the Gov2O Expo, which is our conference at the end of May in Washington, D.C. But also, if you'd like to learn more about spear phishing, Jeff Jonas will be the next presenter in our webcast next week. His session is Spear Phishing, a Smarter and More Dangerous Social Web. And then after that, we also have Louis Shepard from Microsoft Research discussing hiring the next generation of cybersecurity professionals in government, because obviously we need to have people learn about these things to combat the threats. And then finally, Bernard Golden will be leading a session on cloud computing and security. as our last installation of this Security in Government Webcast series. So again, I appreciate you all very much for coming today. If you want more information on those webcasts, the URL is en.o'reilly.com/gov2webcast, and you can sign up for the other webcasts in the series right there. And if you want more information about the Gov2O conference, please check out www.gov2expo.com. And I think that's it for today. Again, thank you all very, very much. One more thing. There are free chapters of Jeff's book available on the webcast site, and you can read a couple of his chapters from his fantastic book, Inside Cyber Warfare.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Jeff. You guys did a great job today, and thank you, everyone else, for joining us. I'm going to close out the meeting in just a moment. If you get a chance, please take our post-event survey. It helps us to improve these events, your feedback, and we really appreciate it. You'll also find a copy of the slide deck on the Gov2 site later today, if you didn't download it here. So please check back and you can grab it there. All right, I'm going to close the meeting now. Thanks, everyone.